I have been in the emergency room, laid on a hospital bed with an IV in each arm, because running a book of 100 million in investments is not easy.
Welcome again to Hired the Podcast. I am Travis Miller, and with me today, very excited to have Luis Báez. Luis has come up through the ranks of sales, working with some of the biggest companies in the world, including Google, Uber, and Tesla. Now he finds himself, he's found a talent for sales and revenue enablement, and he's now a remarkably successful speaker, coach, and consultant specializing in sales and revenue coaching strategy, among other things that we're not going to talk about today. But Luis, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Travis. I am excited and appreciate the time and the opportunity to let my hair down and lay it all bare for your audience.
Yeah, sounds great. So one question I want to start off with, because I think it's really informative for what people are capable of, and especially in sales. Sales is a really, really in an entrepreneurial position. But I want to find out what was your journey from sales to true entrepreneur, running your own business and your own practice?
Yeah, gosh, appreciate the question. For me, I stumbled into sales at a young age because I was a bit lost in the sauce. I couldn't figure out the flavor. Didn't want to be a doctor. Didn't want to be an attorney, and resisted going into business or corporate. But here I am. And I had a career that blew my mind, being recruited at some of those most influential companies in the world. And I developed this capacity for connecting with people, helping them to visualize a much better outcome for themselves and for their teams and for their customers, driving that narrative using data. And eventually, I stepped into leadership and built teams around me to drive those sort of outcomes for customers. And along the way, I pivoted into entrepreneurship accidentally. I started sort of side hustling because people were tapping my shoulder and going, Luis, you've been recruited to all these companies. Like, they just show up in your LinkedIn inbox. Like, what's the secret sauce? And so I started helping folks on the side, on weekends, optimizing their LinkedIn profiles and their content strategies and everything around that. And then eventually I started getting more taps on the shoulder around like, hey, how do you run a side hustle while working full time? And so that became a pivot. And so I started coaching other entrepreneurs, and I led coaching programs, group coaching programs, online self-paced learning opportunities and things like that. And I leaned into the opportunity to go into full-time, solopreneurship and entrepreneurship, really when I stepped away from my time at Tesla. Hurricane Maria had devastated the island of Puerto Rico, where my family and I are from. And I needed to step back from that corporate grind, find a more flexible sort of like work situation that allowed me to sustain my lifestyle and my living, but also be more available for the relief efforts that were happening. And so I went from having a short list of clients in my side hustle to taking on a full client load, bigger contracts, and expanding on my group coaching program. And eventually I stepped into speaking around leadership and entrepreneurship. And eventually I was tapped to publish online courses that are now distributed across channels like LinkedIn Learning. So it's just been an accidental but beautiful swirl of an experience.
Well, you've got tremendous self-awareness for who you are and what your talents and skills are and what you can bring to others. And that's one of the things that I've heard you talk about frequently is there's a commonality in successful leaders, and that is their own self-awareness and their ability to build that awareness in teams. This is kind of a strange question, but how can a leader be aware if they're self-aware?
I love that question. And I will say this, it is a journey. It is not a checklist. It is not you can't have a microwave mentality. You don't push a button and a minute later you get, the instant gratification. Developing self-awareness or awareness that you've achieved self-awareness is something that you do over time and you cannot do alone. I arrived at this place after doing all of the self-assessment. So the Enneagram, the 16 personalities, and every other sort of matrix in between that helps you understand how people perceive you, your communication style, your emotional sort of intelligence, and all of these things, right? You can start to gather data prescriptively around, all of these ways that you engage in professional settings and in social settings. But then there's the work that you do within. And that is with a therapist, with a spiritual guide, or whomever you take on that journey with you. But there is a level of deep introspection and healing that is also in tandem and required for that self-realization and self-awareness. And it's ongoing, meaning that as you learn things about yourself, you apply that knowledge. You don't arrive at the destination of self-awareness to start seeing the results from the work that you do. You kind of, harvest as you go, and you apply those lessons. And the other thing that really helps me in my sort of process is journaling. I love writing. I love just sitting down with a good cup of coffee, some jazz tunes, and putting my head down in the morning and just brain dumping, right? Sometimes you're not even aware of the things that are clouding your vision or your capacity to be self-aware because, you can't trust your mind. You have to visualize the things that are in it and make them tangible to then work through them.
I was going to ask, why do you think that is such an advantage for leaders to possess this awareness as opposed to reading books about leadership and management style and saying, this is the one that's going to be effective, I'm going to adopt this? Why do you feel that self-awareness can be such an advantage for so many great leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the capacity to have empathy for customers or for the people that you work with, for the leaders that you're inspiring and driving and the folks that you're motivating, the more aware you are of self, the better you are capable of communicating and influencing and arriving at a place of, common denominators with groups of people. Whether you listening to me right now and you're like, this dude has no idea what he's talking about, I'm not with this woo-woo stuff, I don't see how this applies to business. Cool. I think that there are so many books around leadership and servant leadership and examples of these things that show that there are so many ways to approach business and teams and growth. You can be a dictator, or you can be the type of leader that inspires. And so the more self-aware you are, the more authentically you show up, the more vulnerable you are with your teams, the realer you become, the more relatable you are, and ultimately the more respectable, right? I am going to work really hard and I'm going to work late nights and weekends and interrupt my vacations for a leader that I know is a real one and down as hell and, is not above, getting down on their knees and helping me scrape the floor if that's what's needed to be done.
Mm-hmm. And I think by being self-aware, it allows your true personality to be showcased to the people that you're bringing onto your team. Mm-hmm. And that affords you the opportunity to bring on people who can learn and grow and be enhanced by you. I've been coached by others to be sure to cite my sources during these podcasts, but I'm purposely not going to do that this time. I saw some sales training on LinkedIn earlier today, and oh my God, what boiler room corporate bro Jordan Belfort, I want you on the motherfucking phones. You're going to be on the phones because you are a powerhouse, and if you're not 100% in this at all times, I'm going to know who's going to fucking fail, and that person is not going to be on my team because you are a waste of my motherfucking time. Yeah. And you look at the comments and you're like, what great advice. I feel so motivated. I'm ready to run through a wall for this guy. And I would never work in that place, but if I did, I can't imagine how quickly I would quit if I got that speech. But there are people out there that they're like, what a great environment. I would feel so motivated by this individual to succeed beyond my wildest dreams. And I think that's what you're talking about is self-awareness allows you to authentically be yourself. And I think that allows you to attract people who would gravitate to your authentic self.
Absolutely. You just described the beginning or the early part of my sales career. I started in advertising sales in New York City, where I grew up. And that leadership style that you just described is exactly what I experienced. And as an out gay man, I was also the target of so many rants and bigotry and all these things around my performance, around my, supposed friction with clients that would prefer to connect with straight people, etc. And then juxtapose that, with a completely different example of leadership. I arrived in California, no job, no car, no anything. Spent a lot of time networking and a lot of time on LinkedIn looking for opportunity until a recruiter at LinkedIn tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, we see that you're really engaged on the platform. We'd love to invite you to join the team to teach our folks how to leverage and harness the power of the platform." And so that is, the way that I got into Silicon Valley after showing up. And the first time I experienced that culture around inclusivity and belonging and that focus on like servant leadership. And so imagine me, high anxiety going into my first sales meeting, pipeline review. I've been hitting the phones. I've been hitting the emails. I've been trying to get folks wrangled and trying to, prove myself, starting my career there. Walked into the meeting, numbers, ready to be drilled, ready to go through being called out in front of everybody because that was the experience I was used to, that really high pressure sort of environment. And my sales director walks in 2 minutes late and apologizes, puts her laptop down on the table, ports herself up to the screen and displays her calendar. And it's just this colorful melange and mosaic of all these meetings and things that she's got going on. And she's like, "Y'all, I have heard everything that you need from me. Here's when it's coming. I've got a meeting on this day. I had to push back that meeting because I've got soccer practice with my son and this and this and this and this and that." It was the most human approach to, I got you and I'm balancing. And gave us so much permission to show up as humans, right? To work hard and demonstrate our contributions, but also really embody that flexibility and that sort of work-life balance that we were all supposedly offered in this industry. And it was beautiful and it was productive. I was happy to work really hard for her versus my previous leaders.
Mm-hmm. Not that you couldn't make money at the previous one and be successful, but probably nowhere near as happy doing it.
No, I like to whistle while I work, and I'm not someone who subscribes to you need to work hard and, completely destroy yourself to make a living. I think that cat got out the bag during the pandemic. Everyone worked from home. Everyone was super productive. And, we know now that, killing yourself is not a requirement to making a living.
So I'd imagine it's common experience, and maybe people have to go through a trial by fire when they're starting out their careers on how to identify the cultures and the personalities that you work well with. But what would you say to somebody just starting on their career journey, just making the transition into sales? What are some things you can do as you're searching for a position, as you're searching for a career, to either identify in yourself what types of organizations you could thrive in, or as you're talking to organizations, how do you identify the organizations that are going to allow you to flourish?
Yeah, excellent question. A couple of layers to that. First and foremost, I tell people you've got to be willing to sell on your worst day, meaning you're going to make 99 calls and only one person is going to answer. You're going to send 99 emails and only one is going to respond. And even when you do get those responses, it may not be in your favor. You might be blown off or told to go F yourself or whatever, right? Every now and then you catch a fish, a live one, right? And then you're able to fry it up and enjoy yourself that day. But the majority of it is a grind. And so in those instances, on your worst days, you have to love what it is that you're selling. Whether it's your favorite app, favorite service, favorite social network, whatever you want to sell, you have to love the heck out of it, because you've got to sell it in the worst conditions, in your worst moods, and on your worst days. And then as you're vetting where you want to work, as you're going through the interview process, look at the company's core values. Have they articulated what they are? Do they have a mission? Do they have a sense of purpose? And does that align with the way that you gel and the things that you stand for? And as you're going through the interview process, ask really direct questions. Hey, what is the DNA or the makeup of someone who's successful in this company? What is their behavioral or cultural attribute that makes them thrive here? That'll give you a sense of whether they've even defined success, or if it's the right culture and environment for you, right? When I interviewed at LinkedIn, as you could imagine, people who have a propensity for being connectors and facilitators are people that are gelling well with the culture there. When I interviewed at Google, analytics. If you love numbers and crunching numbers and applying numbers to storytelling or decision making or anything else, you're our person, right? There are cultures that people gravitate towards. So ask that during the interview process. And then the other thing is, even go a step further. As an out gay Latino male, I look for things like employee resource groups. When I'm interviewing at a big company, I'm looking at, have they invested in executive leaders, in, underrepresented and underserved groups? How do they recruit? How do they retain? Are there people in leadership positions that are otherwise underrepresented in other groups, right? All of these are positive indicators that I'm stepping into a space where I am going to have a higher likelihood of thriving and succeeding in my career, without the distractions of people trying to tear me down for who I am, but instead being focused on the results that I'm driving and the capacity that I bring.
So if somebody is starting their sales journey, they find an organization, they find an organization that they feel like they can thrive in. They're excited about the product that they're going to be selling, even on their worst day. What advice do you give to new salespeople to give themselves the best chance of success as they're starting their career?
Yeah. Gosh, there are two things you've got to embrace. Number one, you don't know it all. Look stupid. Ask the dumb questions, right? I always, my first month on a new job, sorry, dumb question, new guy. I say that over and over out loud to give myself permission and give everyone, that reminder to give me that grace, right? I try to make my questions as thoughtful and as intelligent as possible, and I try not to step on toes, but hey, I'm the new guy. I lean into that. I also advise people to surround yourself with the A players, right? Shadow their calls, check out their emails, look at their sales decks, right? If the organization you work for has a revenue intelligence tool like Gong, which records and analyzes calls and, people archive them and things like that, go through sales calls for winning deals and winning people, right? Start to understand how it is they talk about the product, or how it is that they answer, all the objections and all those things, right? That is the quickest way to absorb tribal knowledge, right? And beyond that, you've got to invest in yourself. Whatever your learning style, YouTube videos, LinkedIn learning courses, books, podcasts, whatever it is, find your way of learning and be a sponge. There are people who've already spilled the tea on the best way to influence, position, anchor pricing. I mean, there are so many people out here trying to build a name and a reputation for themselves. They're giving that secret sauce away for free. So learn from the best externally, learn from the best internally, leverage your revenue intelligence tool, and do your work.
I love that idea of no dumb questions. I've found that a lot of times the people who are just hitting their stride, I kind of break knowledge up into 4 categories. There's the unconsciously incompetent, people just starting, have no idea what they don't even know. A lot of times I find those people almost stumble into success because they ask all these questions that they think are dumb, but people love to talk about themselves and their product and their company. And they end up loving talking to those people that just They just got to ask questions because they don't know anything else. And then you've got the consciously incompetent people who are on their journey and they're starting to realize, okay, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. I actively have to work to learn it. And they start to ask a lot of really good, insightful questions. And people love talking to them. And then you get to the danger zone, the consciously competent people who know what they know, but they have to work to know it. And there is a person that used to work with who lived in this stage for a long time. I'm not sure he ever got out of it, but he'd be talking to a customer of ours and he'd be taking a job order, asking them what they needed to hire, and he would do it without asking a single question. So you're looking for a sales engineer in the Midwest, right? Probably need about 5 to 7 years experience, right? And they need a degree in mechanical or electrical engineering. Is that correct? Yep. And you're probably going to pay about $120,000 to $140,000 for this person. Yeah. And you're in a major metro, so you're not going to relocate for this person, right? Right. And this would go on for half an hour. And at the end, okay, I think I got what I need. I'll get you some candidates later next week.
Yep.
He never made a placement. He had some big struggles there for a long time because he couldn't connect with people, but he wasn't conveying himself as an expert. He was conveying himself as a know-it-all. And when you cross that line and you stop asking the dumb questions, it becomes a lot more challenging for people to want to engage with you.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, particularly now in the age of AI, and there's this assumption of distrust, which has led to this unintended reality where trust is a more fluid currency than it used to be. Meaning people are more willing to put their trust into connecting with the human who facilitates a process, is consultative, and really just offers that assurance of their desired outcome, right? I can fill out a form. I can, do whatever sort of intake process. But at some point, I want to be seen, heard, and understood before I give a credit card number or the wire transfer details or whatever else, right? There needs to be assurance because we have risk aversion, right? We don't fully trust the automations and the bots and the things. And so the capacity to sell, to coach, to guide and influence someone is actually an even more critical skill to have this day and age. And being able to do so confidently and show up in conversations and influence in that way is actually going to secure your standing for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't believe how many terrible, terrible pieces of AI outreach that I get. And so many of them are trying to sell me AI outreach tools. There's one company that once a week I get an email from them. And this is a company set up to do AI drip marketing campaigns. And every week they congratulate me and Miller Resource Group on our continued involvement and success in helping to alleviate the homeless problem in Salt Lake City. I run a recruiting firm, and this is not that I have a problem. I've never given thought to the homeless problem in Salt Lake City. I've never been to Utah. I'm sure it's an issue that needs looking at, but I have no idea how this AI tool thought that me and my company had any involvement with this at all. And it does. It makes it incredibly difficult to trust any piece of outreach from any salesperson. Even voicemails are getting sketchy. I know I'm getting AI voicemails from people. So do you see this as one of the biggest challenges for salespeople, particularly B2B salespeople in the market right now?
Absolutely. And I think that anything that you can do to interrupt the automation is going to work in your favor. So I think that I lean into the analog way of doing things. Yeah, handwritten notes and things like that are going to go a lot further this day and age. They're going to stand out as a more human touch when everything else is automated and funky and cryptic and misaligned. Right. And so a handwritten note this day and age, don't underestimate the power of something like that when you're doing your prospecting and nurturing your relationships. I also like to deliver personalized videos over long emails. Right. And so like, hey, I thought of you because I read this, saw this, experienced this, created this. Right. Want to share. Right. And delivering that sort of message in a heartfelt way in front of camera, is going to stand out from the sea of, all these AI generated emails that are very clearly robotic and have no human touch, had no real alignment or thoughtfulness behind it. But if someone gets on the camera and says, hey, Travis, like I've been listening to the show, I know that these 3 things are really important to you, and I do one of them really well. I'd love to connect with you and see if I'm a fit to be a speaker on the show, right? Like that's going to stand out over like, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I speak on this and that. And like that's not who you want to connect with. And that's not who you're going to trust to put in front of your audience.
Yeah. So I'd imagine you would advocate for salespeople. You're much better off sending out 10 targeted, well thought out pieces of outreach versus banging out 150 phone calls of the exact same message to a list that's just put in front of you and you set your auto dialer to go.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes to your question. I also want to acknowledge the reality of scenario number 2. Everyone who works in sales, particularly with everything that's happening macroeconomically right now, they're under an enormous amount of pressure. So they have to fine tune their approach. They've got to hit those 150 dials and 150 emails and things like that. But yes, pause for a moment. Qualify that list of 150 leads that you're given and you're told to go pursue. Extract the 10 that feel the most aligned because either they filled out all of the fields in the form for during intake, or based on other parameters like their income or time in business or whatever it might be. Like those are buying indicators, right? For those 10 leads, I would prioritize a more personalized approach. Maybe for those folks, I do pause and create a video or something like that. For the rest of the folks on that list, I still humanize and personalize my messaging as much as possible, right? I'll say, hey there, instead of like, hey, Travis, because I don't have time to say 100 names, right? But I still look at a one-to-one dialogue. I still try to really punctuate the why. Why am I bothering you with this? Why am I reaching out to you? Not the what. I've got this shiny thing and it comes in 12 colors and then it plugs into everything that you already use, right? Like that means nothing. Why are you reaching out to me and telling me about this? Oh, I saw you on a show, or I heard you over here, or I know that you work on these things, and I know you'd appreciate the fact that this thing comes in 12 colors because you said on a show recently that you hate that the other one comes in 3 colors, right? You have to draw a connection as to the why. And you can do that at scale. You can reach out to 100 people with the same why. I'm reaching out to you because I know that as someone who's been in business for 5 or more years, right? Because maybe everyone on the list qualifies that way, right? As someone who's been in business for 5 or more years, I know that you are stuck on these recruitment and retention gripes, right? And I'm working on a solution that helps you with all of that. It only takes 3 minutes to see immediate results, and it doesn't cost you more than a cup of coffee. Do you want to learn more? It's the why, it's the context, right? And the fact that it doesn't cost more than a cup of coffee and only takes 3 hours to get a solution or a result, that's low risk, low bar to entry. So mental load, I'm curious now, like what's going on over here? That's the way that you want to approach your outreach.
How much responsibility do you think that sales leaders have for developing a clear system and ideal cadence for outreach like this? And how much responsibility is on the individual for putting together their own systems and plans in place to be as successful as they can?
Yeah, great question. So assuming you're working with a company that isn't in the position or willingness to invest in sales enablement or sales trainers or anything like that, and it's all on the sales leaders, right? They've got to facilitate the sharing of tribal knowledge. Because what happens typically on teams, it's like every person's for themselves, everyone's incentivized with commissions or whatever. They're holding on to their cards very close to the chest. My best sales decks, my best emails, etc. So as a sales leader, you've got to establish a culture of celebrating, subject matter experts, right? Showcasing their expertise, their leadership, their secret sauce, their superpowers, the way that they're above everybody else, right? Because people in sales, whether they're, self-competitive or competitive with others, there's a competitive element, right? I want to break some kind of PR. I want to stand out somehow, right? And so that's the kind of like natural DNA of anyone that works in sales. And so it's on the sales leaders to facilitate that. That takes then the pressure off of them of doing all the coaching, because the reality is, as a sales leader, you're bogged down with performance reviews and pipeline roll-ups to senior leadership and all the operational things to get the kinks out of the product and the deliverables and the invoicing and everything, right? So you're trying to like clear the path for the revenue to flow. You're not actually focused so much on developing your people. And so you've got to find systems of, creating a flow of that tribal knowledge and celebrating and incentivizing people that way. If you're in a position to invest in sales or revenue enablement, bring on trainers, bring on coaches, then yeah, that would be the best scenario, knowing that leaders can't do it all, is to have someone running in side by side with sales leaders that are just focused on developing the performance of sales reps. And then that person would run with coaching programs, training, certifications, and all those sort of things.
Yeah, you've talked a little bit about the, kind of the burnout of leadership, because, and I'd imagine it's even more rampant at small to mid-sized companies where they are so responsible for the success of the organization and also tasked with wearing so many disparate hats that how can that sales leader in a small organization, mid-sized organization, how can they avoid the perils of being pulled in too many directions at the same time and not being effective enough at any of them?
Yeah, gosh. I want to just, for anyone listening, I just want to acknowledge that burnout is really real. And it, to your point, really rampant. And I've experienced it. I have been in the emergency room, laid on a hospital bed with an IV in each arm, because running a book of 100 million in investments is not easy. Even though I had a team around me, I had the analysts, the account managers, you name it, and I still ended up in that position. What I learned from that experience is that I could have done a whole lot more to very transparently communicate the things that were on my plate and facilitate and create opportunities for people to lean in and raise their hand and take things off of my plate, right? I think there was a bit of like, there's always this hesitation in pushing or delegating because you don't want to seem incapable or weak or like you don't deserve your salary or your position or whatever. Those are real pressures in a corporate environment, no matter what size company. But if you can instead create an opportunity for people to raise their hand and go, I'll take this off your plate, right? Very different experience for all parties involved, right? And that's a testament of your leadership style, your authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability. When you show up that way, people are willing to show up for you as well. That was a lesson that I learned from my burnout experience, is that I could do a whole lot more. And whether it's a project board, calendar, whatever it is, laying out for people exactly where my time and my energy is so they understand why and when I'm a bottleneck in anyone's process.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, especially for new leaders, is the ability to delegate, whether it is a question of fearing being perceived as incompetent because you're not doing this anymore, or the fear of almost being disliked. I don't want to give this person the work that's on my plate because I don't want them to feel like this is a task that is beneath me, so you take it on. I think how can those new leaders overcome the fear of delegation?
You have to embrace it as a requirement of your success. You, as a leader, whether your aspiration is entrepreneurship or not, whether it's C-level, whatever, right? You've got to find ways of duplicating yourself and being able to develop more arms, more tentacles, right? You cannot do it all. You will drown. You will not thrive. You also clip other people's wings. If other people don't have an opportunity to rise to the occasion, to demonstrate their leadership, their willingness, their loyalty, their eagerness, then you as a leader can never tell who your all-star players are. You won't know who to lean into, who to invest into. You also won't see coming anyone who might be at risk of leaving your organization, and thinking about all the time and the knowledge and resources lost when people exit your team, right? And so you've got to develop that trust for delegation. You also have to embrace the lessons. I trusted the wrong people. I did not communicate expectations. I did not track progress, right? I can name so many examples where I fumbled, right? But now I run a much tighter operation, right? Now I am like Mr. Project Board, Mr. Team Huddle, Mr. Everyone report up, because I have just learned how to delegate and empower, but also manage all of that, the processes and the progress, knowing that that's also on my plate.
You touched on an interesting topic there, and it's something that how can leaders do a great job of keeping their eyes on their team so that they are doing everything they can to ensure that the people that they believe in, that they feel could be a huge part of the organization for a long time, if not the rest of their time. What can they be doing to ensure that those people are heard, seen, and that they're creating an environment that those people want to stay at for a long time?
Yeah. Great question. There are a couple of approaches, right? And I want to acknowledge that there are some leaders who have small teams and might have more capacity for doing what I'm about to suggest, while other folks might be managing 100 people across a region. I've experienced that as well. And what I say is, however you can, whether it's on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly cadence, you've got to connect with your teammates. You've got to put them in the driver's seat of their career. And whether it's a project board in like a project management tool like Asana or Monday or whatever that might be, or a simple Google Doc or whatever, you're tracking the notes from these conversations, the progress over time, the metrics, the KPIs that are being driven, et cetera. You're both agreeing to this and tracking and tracing someone's progress throughout. This puts you in a position to understand what intrinsically motivates this person, the things that they need from like a skill and coaching and development standpoint, but also what to expect from them. There are going to be some folks who are like, yep, I'm an account executive today, but I want to be a VP of sales tomorrow, and I'm going to be the chief revenue officer in 5 years, right? And then there are some people who are like, I'm a little lost in the sauce, haven't figured it out, but I love the money, right? I'll keep it coming, right? And that's okay. There are some people who love being individual contributors, and then there are some people who aspire to leadership. I've done it all, right? And I can say that you make more money as an individual contributor than you do as a sales leader. So I don't blame anyone for staying in that lane as long as they want to, right? I think I should have stayed in that lane just a little bit longer myself, right? And so, but you have to understand what motivates people. That way you understand, okay, this is my all-star player. right? This is the person that I'm going to like nurture and prime to take on enterprise level deals, multi-million dollar contracts. This is going to be the person I put in front of my C-level executives for quarterly business reviews, right? Or this person doesn't aspire to that, but they're a closer. Great. I'm going to keep them in this like high volume account lane, keep them busy, until they're fed, they're hungry. I'm going to keep feeding, right? That helps you to assemble the right team, making sure that everyone's in the right lane or the right seat on the bus or whatever metaphor works for you. But it's just a matter of making sure that there's calibration and alignment so that you are leaning into everyone's desire, intrinsic motivation, and highest potential outcome.
Mm-hmm. It's about the person's future. I remember years ago when I was still actively recruiting for customers, I tried to recruit this guy, and he asked me to tell him a little bit about the position. He said, "Yeah, that one's definitely not for me. That's really the job I was doing about 10 years ago. But let me get you the names and email addresses for some of the people on my team right now who I think that could be a good fit for." And I said, "You mean people you used to work with?" He goes, No. It sounds like a great job. You did a good job presenting it. And not everybody's going to work at my company forever. So it sounds like a great opportunity. So if it's right for them, then you should talk to them. And they should hear you out. I tell you, I was not able to recruit anyone away from that company. Because that was a leader that believed in their future more than the success of his immediate team.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge piece, a huge piece.
Yeah, I think especially now, again, I know I probably sound like aged or whatever, but like there's been a huge shift in the last 4 or 5 years, and even though we talk about layoffs across different industries and all these macroeconomic, contributors to the way that companies are shrinking and right sizing and doing all these things, it's still a laborer's market. Right? It's still really critical to think about the kind of environment you're creating, the kind of team that you're assembling to define your long-term success. And if you want A players, you want the best of the best, you have got to show up for them in the best ways, right? They're not going to settle for subpar culture, subpar salaries, etc.
Mm-hmm. They might take it if they have to, but they're not going to stay there for it.
That part too, right? Yeah, you'll be a pit stop while they get to where they're going.
Luis, this has been fantastic, man. I really appreciate it. What should people be reaching out to you about if they want your help, and what's the best way for them to find you?
Gosh, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you are either trying to upskill yourself, build a team, or uplevel your team as well. But I always say that the best way to make sure I'm the right fit for you is to understand my playbooks. I lay them all bare, all of my leadership and sales playbooks over at learnfromluis.com. It's all free. So check out what I teach and then figure out for yourself if I'm your person.
Luis Báez, really appreciate it. This has been Hired the Podcast. I'm Travis Miller. As always, big thank you to Noah Cuff, our producer. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.